What's up, fisher people? We're getting ready for open water season. Spring is almost here, and one of the big things that you have to pay attention to when we get into spring is water temperature. So, we're going to talk a lot about water temperature, how that affects fishing, how it affects where you fish, and how active the fish are. Obviously, in the spring, things are warming up, so you're in a period of change, of transition, and the same kind of flip side thing occurs in the fall, and then in the summer you got more of a stable period. So it's probably a variable that, first of all, if you don't have a thermometer or you don't have a boat, you may or may not notice anything about the temperatures. So likely it's something that kind of falls by the wayside in most people's fish brains. But if you're paying attention to that, it can be one of the most important variables to figure out where the fish are going to be and when they're most likely to feed. So, um, first of all, fish are always trying to kind of balance this risk reward of conserving energy versus getting more energy or feeding, right? So, depending on the conditions, they may be more or less likely to chase things, to chase down a meal. As the water temps start to rise, that's what kind of triggers the feeding in the early part of the season. That warmer water revs up the metabolism of the different fish, the bait fish, as well as the predator fish. And they're also getting ready for spawning if they're females, and even the males take part in that, obviously. So they need to build up their energy at that point. So when they get that biological trigger that it's time to start feeding, the water starts to get warmer, that's going to kick in some of those feeding instincts. This obviously affects all species of fish, but we're primarily going to be talking about walleye here today, at least in terms of uh, the reference numbers and the points that we're using here. So, in the spring, one thing you have to remember, spring or fall actually, is that the smaller a body of water is, the faster it's going to gain or lose heat. So, if it's a super shallow little pond, it's obviously going to lose its ice earlier in the year. It's going to warm up faster. So, in terms of paying attention to where you're going to fish, you want to find those spots in the spring where the water temperatures start to rise faster than other places. And if you're talking about a big body of water, you're looking more at like bays and inlets and things like that, shallower spots on a lake. Because believe it or not, you could be in totally different parts of a lake. We'll take Devil's Lake, for example, where you could put your boat in the water and find 48-degree water here, and eventually some other spot on the lake, same time of day, you could find 57-degree water just because it's shallower and it's warming up faster. Kind of the goes, like once you start to get above 50 degrees, things start to get more interesting in the spring. In terms of the spawn, I think a lot of people believe that it tends to happen between 45 and 55 degrees for walleyes. Um, the hard factor there is, like, say you get a weird year where you still have ice on the lake after May. A lot of times the spawning may happen under the ice, so you might kind of miss that period. But if you just focus on, like, say the first post spawn feeding period, wherever you can find temperature that's first starting to hit 50, 55, 60-degree water temperatures, that's what you're going to want to look for. The warmer the better. That's when your bays and your shallow flats and stuff are going to be really effective. And especially if you get a day where you get some sun hitting the water, you'll probably find that in afternoons, as the sun rises and things warm up, that's when the activity starts to heat up. So a lot of times people think about walleye fishing at night or early first thing in the morning, and that can work, but it may be more of a summer thing. In the spring, they actually can kind of welcome that light and that heat, and that their eyes are sensitive. People have also heard that walleyes are very light sensitive. And that's true, but again, if they need to feed, they're going to feed. So they'll take on that risk if they need to feed. So again, conversely, in the fall, you're looking at the opposite situation, right? So as temperatures are starting to fall, they get a biological trigger that, ooh, winter's coming. We need to start feeding. We need to put on some fat for the winter. And I'm typically looking for water temps as they start to hit low 50s, even better high 40s. Again, Devil's Lake as an example. Last year, one time, we put the boat in the water, and the first water that we saw was 55, 56 degrees. not a lot of activity. We kept moving to shallower and shallower spots in the lake, found low 50s. Okay, things are a little better. As soon as we found 50 or 47, 48, 46 degree water, that's where we really started to get some active fish, especially some bigger fish. So that's kind of your target rule of thumb number, if that means anything. I mean, it's hard to pin down something as black and white as that. But typically, if you can find low 50s to high 40s, the first spots on the lake or the first lakes in the area that reach that number are going to be your best places. And then when you get into the summer, essentially the best thing you can get in the summer is just consistency. The more often you can get a long, stable period that's not too far above or below normal temperatures, the better off you are. And a pattern of feeding will develop with those fish, and they'll stick to that pattern until something changes, like a super cold front or a really bad storm or something like that. So definitely fish are typically going to be deeper in the summer than they were in the spring, just because that's where the cooler water is. So you are, by and large, going to be fishing deeper. But you might get points like that's, again, early morning in the summer. You might be able to find them feeding up shallow. Same thing at night. So that's the times to hit the shallow spots. But midday in the summer, fishing can still be good as long as things are fairly consistent. It's not blisteringly hot, or you don't have a terrible cold front that comes through. And another thing to think about in the summer, you may or may not have heard about the concept of water turnover and water stratification and things like that. But essentially, as the sun hits the top of the water, that part of the water warms up faster than what's underneath, right? So that water is going to be much warmer than the water down here. And then at some point, it starts to kind of stratify into layers. And you hear this concept called of the thermocline. Well, certain temperatures of water will hold more or less oxygen. So in the middle of the summer, this bottom layer is not eventually going to start to wear out of its oxygen, and it's not going to be very oxygenated. Fish aren't going to want to be down there very often, but they are going to want to be away from the super, super hot water up top. So there's a line where they'll come down to. That's usually the thermocline. And sometimes you can even see this on a depth finder, especially if you got the sensitivity up really high, and you can start to see kind of some bubbly activity right in the middle across your screen, and it might be at like 30, 40, 50 feet of water or something. That's probably the thermocline. And a lot of times when you hear about people catching suspended fish in open water, that's where they are. They're suspended right above the thermocline because they're getting water that's as cool as possible but still fairly well oxygenated, and that's where they're chasing the bait fish at that time. So that's when your lead core trolling and stuff like that really shines, and your precision trolling, and you need to know exactly how deep your baits are getting, because it really matters at that point. You can't just judge am I hitting bottom or not, because you might not want to be hitting bottom. So one of the other main things to remember, along with this idea that fish are always kind of looking for that trade-off between conserving energy versus chasing more energy in form of food, they don't like surprises. So like we were just talking about in the summer season, if you get a massive cold front in the summer, that can really kill fishing. They don't like the change in barometric pressure. They don't like the sudden changes in temperatures. It can just throw them into a funk. And it's just going to be, you can still catch fish, it's just going to be harder, and you just kind of have to accept that. Those days are going to be tough. The same thing goes with the spring and fall, when things happen in the opposite direction of what would normally happen in that season. So if you're in the spring and the water's warming, and all of a sudden it gets abnormally cold for 3, 4, 5 days in a row, and the temperatures actually start to drop, that's probably not the best time to go fishing either. That's going to throw them off their routine. And then in the fall, if your temperatures are falling, and then all of a sudden you get unseasonably warm temperatures that bring the temperatures back up, that's probably not going to be the best thing either. If it's starting to hit low 50s and all of a sudden comes back up towards 60 degrees, they're going to be like, oh, never mind, false alarm. It's not really fall yet. And it can throw things into a funk. So pay attention to water temperatures as you're driving around on the water. If you're in a boat and you have a depth finder, be paying a lot of attention to that thermometer, especially in the transition periods, and note where you're finding fish and what temperatures. So it's really important to know what depth you're catching fish in, and it might be kind of important to know what you're catching them on and things like that. But look for the temperature of the water at that point. you catch a bunch of fish in this spot and nothing over in this other spot, and it's spring or fall in a transition period, I wouldn't doubt if you looked at your thermometer, those two spots have very different water temperatures. So that's a really good thing to know. It's a good thing to pay attention to. It's an easy thing to pay attention to and track. And it's probably going to help you find fish a lot easier. So along with water temperature affecting where you're going to fish and where you're going to find them, it also will affect how you're going to fish and how you're going to target them. Because again, remember the energy equation. They're always trying to decide, is it worth chasing that bait right now, or should I conserve my energy instead? Basically, the higher the temperatures are, the higher the fish's metabolism is going to be, and the more they're going to be apt or willing to chase something that's fast moving. So super early in the year, super early spring, you're probably not going to be trolling crankbaits. And if you do, you're not going to be trolling them very fast. That's the time of year where you're going to see a lot more jigging and a lot more slip bobbering. As the waters warm up, fish are willing to chase things more. Then you can graduate up to, you know, maybe pulling bottom bouncers and spinners more, and then crankbaits will start to come into play and things that are more faster moving, and then get to the fall. Eventually, like, it's got to be pretty late fall when the temps start to get really cold, because they're still pretty apt to chase things in the fall when the water temperatures are falling, because they really want to put on the feed bag before the winter cold hits. But if it gets super, super cold, like if you're fishing in late October, early November, and you're dealing with like 38-degree water, if you do troll crankbaits, you're going to have to slow down. You're not going to catch them at 2 to 2.5 mile an hour. It's probably going to be more like 1.5, maybe even 1. So keep that in mind as well with how you're targeting what you're targeting. Also, one other thing I throw out there, in the middle of summer, even though it can be super hot, if the fish are really deep, especially if they're sitting on like deep humps or deep rock piles or something, jigging can still be very effective, especially like jigging wraps to sit on those fish and kind of get some reaction bites. Those spots can be harder to target by pulling crankbaits, even though a fast moving bait still might work. You know, lead core can be great for fishing those suspended fish in open water, but if fish are down deep 30, 40 feet on, you know, rock piles and humps and stuff like that, jigging is still a very effective way to target them, especially jigging wraps in the summer. Thanks for watching another fishing video. If you liked it, click the button to say so, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. And if you want to go fishing with us, check us out at bloemendaalfishing.com. And if you didn't like the video, I'm sorry. I'll try harder next time.